Welcome back. It is Monday, December 18th, exactly 3 weeks before the anticipated Bitcoin ETF. And I'm here with Mark Jeffery. And Mark is a Bitcoiner from before me, actually wrote 2 books on Bitcoin, has been very, very involved in the DeFi space on a number of chains. And he'll talk a little bit about that, maybe just introduce him if you don't already know him. I suspect most people might already know him. And has been heavily involved in these BRC20s, as well as just being a Bitcoiner like me. So let's dive in. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Fred, thank you for having me on as I think your first guest. I believe I'm your first guest. I'm
not
sure.
You are my first guest. Yeah, you're my first guest. So I think today I'd really like to focus about these fees on Bitcoin, so you noticed this when, Mark, these fees?
Well, the first time I noticed a giant spike in these fees was back in, I think it was like February or March, earlier this year, when BRC20s erupted on the Bitcoin chain and ordinals in general. And everybody was minting BRC20s like crazy, including me. I was definitely in there digging around. I was buying some of the earlier ones. I bought a bunch of Ordi, thankfully. But there was a lot of stuff I bought and minted that went nowhere, and a bunch of stuff that did. So that was the first hump. Second hump, the second amount of activity on the Bitcoin chain, where it sort of gummed up the chain to a certain degree, made transactions take a couple hours, and made the fees go up, was right after Binance listed Ordi as the first BRC20 that they listed on a big exchange, right? So that was another giant jump up.
Right, and so I think that's one of the things I'd really like to point out in this podcast is, because we were sort of debating this offline, and we were wondering why was it that all of a sudden these fees had gone up like crazy. So let me pull up I'm going to pull up a screen here. I'm going to share this screen. And I'm going to look at this Ordinals page. And this is amazing. If you can see here, Ordinals, they started in February, but by August, we were having almost no fees being generated. So it was, on the order of, $58 million a day, right? And then, it was, the cumulative fees were $58 million, cumulative. Daily fees were on the order of 34,000. So we ratcheted up here. And at one point we were doing $9 million a day in fees. And that was about 4 days ago. So when we looked at this, initially we're like, okay, what's going on? Why did the fees completely drop off here? And then why did they suddenly take off here? And the answer is, Mark?
Yeah. So, the first time it was the listing of Ordi on Binance. Right. And then the second time was the listing of Sats on Binance. So it was the second BRC20 that was listed. Yeah. And I think these are easy for Binance to list, unlike a lot of coins, because there were fair launches. There is no company behind them. And remember, both of these got listed after the Department of Justice actions against Binance and against CZ, or the coordinated actions of multiple agencies. So Binance very clearly feels that these are safe, not securities, even after all of those actions, right? So, and I think the reason why is because they had fair launches. There's no company behind them. So,
yeah, both Sats. And so the way that works is anybody can mint these coins, right? So these coins get defined as inscriptions on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then in the case of Ordi, it was a 21 million cap on Ordi, and I think you could mint 1,000 at a time, and so there was 21,000 times people just said mint, 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 and there was some real cost involved. So those people effectively paid the miner fees. And at that time, the miner fees were, if I remember, about $30 per inscription, or something like that, $20, $30.
Yeah, it went up pretty high. I remember paying a lot of money and thinking to myself, "Oh my God, am I being dumb, wasting Bitcoin,
Right.
minting these things which might be worthless, right?" But in some cases, it turned out to be very much the opposite. But in a lot of cases, yeah, it was wasted money. So a little bit of a crapshoot.
Right.
But
And,
yeah, but I remember the fees back then. I remember back in February,
right.
it roughly doubled the amount of money that the miners were making. So very significant plus for Bitcoin miners. I don't
Right.
know what
And
it is
again,
now.
and again now, 3 days ago, again,
Yeah.
it had doubled the overall fee. So, there's a lot of discussion in the Bitcoin community about this. What are your thoughts on this as kind of a Bitcoiner and a non-Bitcoiner?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a little bit more partial to other things than you are.
Yeah.
Although I love Bitcoin, and like you, I believe Bitcoin is the prime asset, and the Bitcoin ETF is the most important thing that's ever happened in crypto, almost since Satoshi, released Bitcoin itself. So I agree with you there. My personal view on this is that things like ordinals increase. If you look at Bitcoin, the product, as essentially the world's most permanent log file, which I believe is ultimately what the product is, where Bitcoin is sort of one application on top of that operating system. There are a number of other things which can arise and probably should arise, and which power the miners monetarily, as we've seen, but also provide more value to Bitcoin itself. I think this is ultimately very good for Bitcoin because all these other products can arise on the God chain, if you will,
Right.
and I think if it's just digital gold, its potential is 10 trillion at its peak, maybe 20 trillion, and that's kind of it, maybe.
Right.
But if all these other things exist on top of it in parallel, then 100 trillion, maybe
Right.
200 trillion
Well,
are the peak
Mark,
value of it.
for example, Mark Yusko made a point. I think it was him. He sort of said, everything is ultimately going to settle on Bitcoin. And by everything, I think he kind of means your real estate, your real estate deed, maybe your passport, who knows, right? But there's going to be anything that needs sort of a permanent location somewhere. That permanent location can be Bitcoin. And so, I think if you sort of say, well, should we deprioritize that over just sending somebody some Bitcoin? I'm not sure. Sending somebody putting my COVID test on Bitcoin might be just as valuable as sending somebody 10,000 sats. So from my perspective, they're valid uses of the blockchain.
They are, and the product is the 500 exahash. I think it's 500, right?
Yeah.
That backs the Bitcoin chain. That product can be used in multiple dimensions. And Bitcoin, the coin itself,
Right.
is not just gold, but also gas. So it's
Right.
gold and oil at the same time. I mean, my God, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bitcoiners should love that, I think.
But the interesting thing is I sort of came, I won't say out of the closet, but I came into the light a little bit in the Bitcoin community because I had really endorsed this ETF. And I said, listen, this is going to be great. It's going to be great for the price of Bitcoin. It's going to be great for the adoption of Bitcoin. And I fundamentally believe, as a guy who's gone really deep in the wallet space and stuff, that these things are not meant for everybody. A lot of people, if you're older than 40, and you've got some net worth and you have a family and you want to save some money, doesn't it make more sense to have your money in a BlackRock ETF as opposed to on a ledger that could be hacked, and it's very hard to give it to your wife or kids. It's a lot of negatives, right? So. So that's sort of my, just from a pure utility point of view, I think it's going to be fantastic. And from a discovery perspective, I think, we haven't seen anything yet because we're definitely not, we may be in a bull market from the point of view of the price action, but, if I go down on the street and talk to people about Bitcoin, they're not at all interested. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, everybody thinks it's dead still, right?
Yeah.
Which is really weird to me, but
Yeah.
it's the vibe on the street. In fact, I had lunch with Susan today, our common friend we
All
both
right.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So and she was asking me, she was like, hey, so what's going on in crypto? She had no idea
No.
that it was back up off the mat, and people were making money. I told her I didn't make any money in 2022, and I made good money in 2023, and she's like, really? How did you do that? And I
Right.
kind of laid it out for her, and she was very surprised. And you're right, your average, and Susan's very intelligent, very in tech, is very aware
Yeah.
of lots of things going on. She still didn't know this, right? So yeah, the vibe, it hasn't permeated the common
I
awareness
think
yet.
I think this ETF is going to change that. I don't know if you've seen this. The first of the ad campaigns started coming out today.
No, I did not see that.
Oh yeah, so we should play that for the clip. It's from well, I don't need to play it right now, but it's the most interesting man in the world. Remember that guy?
Yes.
And he's at a bar with a couple, and he says, "You know what's interesting right now? Bitcoin." That's it. That's
Is
the
it a
ad.
real ad, or is this an AI thing, or is this?
No, this is a real ad. This is
And
the
it's a
ad
real
that-
guy. Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the same guy, yeah, is doing it. So I think it's real. I think it's not an AI, but so anyway, so I definitely think that I think we're going to get into a bull market of at least recognition of Bitcoin and the ETF in a matter of months. So I'm extremely bullish right now on the Bitcoin space. And we'll see on these ordinals and everything else. I mean, this could be a shift, right? In terms of people starting to think that this might happen on Bitcoin or it belongs on Bitcoin as opposed to it doesn't belong on Bitcoin. Now we're going to see. There's a lot of hate among Bitcoiners.
There
right
is.
now.
There is. Well, I'll tell you something else that happened that was really funny to me anyway. So, we saw this BRC20 and Ordinals thing erupt on Bitcoin, mostly because up until earlier this year, the only way you could do NFTs and tokens were on one of these other chains, right? Like Ethereum or Arbitrum or whatever. And then somebody figured out a way to do it on Bitcoin, and lo and behold, it erupted.
Yeah.
Since then, it's had a lot of success on Bitcoin, right? And so what's happening now is across all the other chains, they now have figured out they can do ordinals on their chains, right? Which is really weird because it was a hack on Bitcoin because we don't have smart contracts, right? They have smart contracts on these other chains, and yet they're choosing to do ordinals to emulate what's going on Bitcoin.
Right.
Which is funny because they have smart contracts. They don't need to do ordinals, right?
Well,
but yet it has become the dominant way they're doing NFTs and tokens at the moment, so much so that it crashed the Arbitrum chain, just knocked it
Really?
offline because there was so much traffic, right? And
I saw that they were doing it on Avalanche,
yeah,
and
like it's
And
kind of
with the-
hilarious.
which is I think they call them ARC20s now.
Yes,
Sort of like this meme language just is like, probably we're going to have ARC100s too,
yeah.
all the same kind of, craziness. Like if, it's sort of now legitimized on Bitcoin, so it's going to other chains.
But those other chains don't have Bitcoin's proof of work, right?
No.
So I know that my BRC20s are permanent and backed by that 500 exahash. Anything else on any other chain, because it's proof of stake, some group of humans somewhere could change that at any time. Now, is it likely? I don't know, but it's possible. It's not possible on Bitcoin.
Well, it is possible that they could change Bitcoin to not allow any further such things. So that's possible.
They could. There's that whole thing
Right,
from
so
Ocean.
that's Luke Dasher Jr. is now putting out a whole bunch of stuff saying, let's forbid this stuff completely now.
Yeah, so Luke Dasher is a Bitcoin core dev,
Yeah.
Which anybody can call themselves that, but theoretically he is, and he does have a following. He does have some legitimacy with some folks, and he thinks that ordinals and BRC20s are spam. They're an abuse of being able to write on the Bitcoin blockchain that was never intended, and so he has come up with a miner, his own miner, which refuses to mine any blocks that have ordinals or BRC20s in them. and he wants to get that into Bitcoin Core, the core miner that everybody uses, and he's promised to get that done middle of next year. Will he succeed? It feels. I mean, it's debatable. It feels to me like no, because miners make more money if they mine ordinals and BRC20s, as much as 2x. So that if they're mercenaries, then they like the 2x.
And
so
that 2x might become 3x after the halvening.
Yes, right, or 4x, right? You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
so
we're in that weird spot. But anyways, let's just keep it short. I just want to emphasize this very specific thing that Binance listing, right, had on the fees on Bitcoin. It's already seems like it's coming down quite a bit. I can't. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. If Binance lists something else, it may jump again. But it does seem to be a very kind of sporadic thing. So with that in mind, I'm going to sign off. And thanks, Mark, for jumping on the podcast. And I hope everybody enjoyed Mark's viewpoint. He's very knowledgeable in these things. All right, guys.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks.